Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. The air in the small suburban home was thick with silence, save for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. The golden hues of the late afternoon sun spilled through the sheer curtains, painting soft patterns over the hardwood floor. Sarah Collins sat hunched over the worn kitchen table, her fingers tightly wrapped around a cup of now lukewarm coffee. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become nothing more than a shell, empty, lifeless, and frozen in time. It had been a year since Emily vanished, a year since Sarah's world shattered into irreparable fragments. The ache of losing her daughter never dulled. It lurked in every corner of her existence, haunting her in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn. There had been no answers, no closure, only the unbearable weight of uncertainty. Sarah's fingers trembled as she traced the rim of the coffee mug. She had long since stopped making fresh coffee. What was the point? Mornings bled into afternoons, afternoons into nights, all without purpose. Without Emily. The front porch creaked. Sarah's head jerked up. Her pulse quickened as she slowly placed the mug down, straining to listen. The neighborhood was quiet, like it always was at this hour. Maybe it was just a gust of wind, or a stray cat scurrying across the porch. And then came the knock. 3 soft, hesitant taps against the wooden door. Her breath caught in her throat. No one knocked anymore. The neighbors had stopped checking in months ago. The police had given up, and the world had moved on. But Sarah hadn't. Heart hammering, she pushed her chair back and stood on shaky legs. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to be cautious, to peer through the peephole, to prepare herself for disappointment. But something deep inside her told her to open the door. She did, and her world stopped. There, standing barefoot on the porch, was Emily. Sarah felt the earth tilt beneath her feet. Her daughter, her baby, was standing right in front of her, alive, real. But something was different. The Emily she remembered had a bright, mischievous smile, golden hair that danced in the wind, and eyes full of innocence. The Emily standing before her was hollow. Her once vibrant blue eyes were dulled, shadowed with something far beyond her years. Her small frame looked fragile, her clothes tattered and dirt-streaked. Her cheeks were gaunt, her lips chapped. And in her arms, wrapped in thin, worn blankets, were 2 tiny, whimpering babies. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The weight of the moment paralyzed her, her fingers gripping the edge of the doorframe to steady herself. "Mom," Emily whispered, her voice so soft, so broken. "Can I come in?" Sarah's entire body shook. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat was tight, clogged with 1,000 questions that refused to form. Emily's arms trembled under the weight of the babies. A small, urgent cry came from one of the infants, its tiny face scrunching up in distress. Sarah snapped out of her daze. "Emily," she choked, stepping forward. "Oh my God, Emily." She scooped her daughter into her arms, pulling her against her chest. The scent of dirt and dried sweat clung to her, but Sarah didn't care. She sobbed against Emily's tangled hair, her fingers pressing into the frail bones of her back, as if making sure she was real. Emily flinched. Sarah pulled back, holding her at arm's length, her eyes scanning every inch of her daughter's face. "What happened to you?" Her voice cracked. "Where have you been?" Emily shifted the weight of the babies in her arms, her expression wary. I can't talk about it. Not yet. But please, don't call anyone." Sarah's stomach twisted into knots. Her eyes darted between her daughter and the infants nestled against her. This couldn't be real. None of this made sense. A 10-year-old carrying newborns. This was impossible. "Emily," Sarah whispered, struggling to steady her voice. "Who are they?" Emily's grip tightened protectively around the babies, as if afraid someone might take them from her. "They're mine." The word sucked the air from Sarah's lungs. She staggered backward, shaking her head. No, that's not possible. You're just a child." Emily's lips trembled, but she didn't waver. "I know it doesn't make sense," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But it's true." Sarah's legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed onto the couch, her hands trembling. This isn't happening. This isn't real. But the babies were very real. Their soft cries filled the silence, their tiny fingers curled against Emily's tattered sweater. A suffocating panic rose inside Sarah. Her mind reeled with fragmented thoughts, each one more terrifying than the last. Where had she been? Who had taken her? What had they done to her? "Emily," she rasped, "I need you to tell me the truth. Where have you been? Who did this to you?" Emily's body tensed. Her eyes flickered toward the window as if she expected someone to be standing there, watching them. I can't tell you everything," she murmured. "Not yet." Sarah clenched her fists, frustration and fear warring within her. "You don't have to be afraid, sweetheart. You're home now. No one can hurt you." Emily let out a shaky breath. "You don't understand." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They're coming." A cold chill swept over Sarah's skin. She leaned forward, gripping her daughter's hands. "Who?" "Emily." "Who's coming?" Emily hesitated. Her lower lip quivered. And then she whispered two words that sent ice through Sarah's veins. "New dawn." Sarah's blood ran cold. She had never heard of it. But the way Emily said the name, like it was something dark and terrible, like it was something she feared more than death itself, made Sarah's entire body go rigid. The sound of tires crunching against gravel snapped her out of her trance. Her breath hitched. She turned her head slowly toward the front window. A sleek black car had pulled up across the street. The engine idled. The tinted windows hid whoever was inside. Sarah's heart pounded so violently she could hear it in her ears. Emily's grip tightened on the babies, her breathing ragged. "They know I'm here," she whispered. Sarah's stomach dropped. She reached for her phone. Emily's eyes widened in terror. "No, Mom. Please, if you call them, they'll find us. I can't go back. They'll hurt the babies." A shiver crawled down Sarah's spine. Whoever had taken Emily, whoever had done this to her, was watching them. Sarah's hand hovered over the phone. Her mind screamed at her to call the police. But the fear in Emily's eyes stopped her. Sarah knew, at that moment, that calling 911 wouldn't be the end of this nightmare. It would only be the beginning. The shadows of the past. The moment Sarah let go of her phone, she felt like she was committing a mistake she might never recover from. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to call 911, to bring the police into this situation immediately. But the look in Emily's eyes, the sheer terror, the desperate pleading, held her back. Sarah swallowed hard, her gaze shifting to the black car parked across the street. The vehicle sat ominously still, its dark windows concealing whatever, or whoever, lurked inside. The air inside the house felt suffocating, thick with unspoken words and unspeakable fears. She turned back to Emily, who sat curled on the couch, her fragile frame wrapped protectively around the newborns. The babies whimpered softly, their tiny fists grasping at the air, unaware of the storm brewing around them. Sarah knelt before her daughter, her fingers tightening around Emily's trembling hands. "Sweetheart," she whispered, keeping her voice calm despite the pounding in her chest. "I need you to tell me the truth. Everything. Right now." Emily flinched at her mother's urgency, her lips trembling as if she were struggling to contain something too horrifying to speak aloud. Sarah squeezed her hands gently. "You're home now. You're safe. But I need to understand what happened to you." Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. She shook her head, her fingers tightening around the babies. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If I tell you, they'll come. And they won't stop this time. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The words were so final, so absolute, as if Emily had already accepted that danger was inevitable, that she had been running for too long to believe she could ever be safe. The sharp creak of a floorboard from upstairs made Sarah flinch. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The house had been silent before, completely silent. But now, Emily gasped, her head snapping toward the ceiling. "They found me," she choked out. Sarah jumped to her feet, her entire body going cold. No, they couldn't have. Another creak. Closer this time. A shadow flickered across the hallway near the staircase. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Someone was inside the house. Emily clutched the babies tighter, her body shaking so violently Sarah thought she might drop them. "Mom," she whimpered. "What do we do?" Sarah's mind raced. She glanced at the front door, but the black car was still outside, idling like a silent warning. If she ran, would they chase her? Was the person upstairs part of them? Was she walking into a trap either way? Think, Sarah. Think. She grabbed the nearest thing within reach, a fireplace poker from the stand beside the couch. It wasn't much, but right now, it was her only defense. "Stay here," she whispered, eyes locked on Emily. "Do not move." Emily opened her mouth as if to argue, but Sarah was already creeping toward the staircase, her grip tightening around the cold metal rod. She moved slowly, her bare feet making no sound against the wooden floor. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out everything but the deafening silence of the house. As she reached the base of the stairs, she sucked in a sharp breath. The upstairs hallway was pitch dark. Whoever was there, they were waiting. A low creak came from the second bedroom, Emily's old room. Sarah's fingers twitched around the poker. "Who's there?" she called, her voice stronger than she felt. Silence. A long, agonizing silence. And then, a whisper. A voice so low, so inhuman, it sent a shiver racing down Sarah's spine. "She does not belong to you." Sarah's breath hitched. Every hair on her body stood on end. Her knees felt weak, but she forced herself to move forward, one step at a time. She needed to see. She needed to know who had come for her daughter. As she reached the doorway, the air seemed colder, heavier, like something was wrong with the space itself, like reality had shifted, just slightly, into something unnatural. She knew someone was in there. She could feel them. Her fingers trembled as she pushed the door open. The room was empty. No one was there. Sarah's breath came in gasps. She knew what she had heard. She knew someone had been watching them. And yet, there was nothing. Only the faint scent of something metallic, something sterile. Her mind raced. New dawn. Emily had said they were watching her. Sarah turned on her heel, her instincts screaming at her to get back downstairs, back to Emily. She hurried down the steps, faster than before, the poker still clutched tightly in her grip. When she rounded the corner back into the living room, her breath caught in her throat. The front door was open, and the black car was gone. Emily was still there, sitting rigidly on the couch, her arms wrapped around the newborns in a protective grip. Sarah's voice came out in a breathless whisper. Did you see who opened the door?" Emily shook her head. Her face was pale, her eyes still wide with fear. "Mom," she whispered, "we need to leave. Now." Sarah swallowed hard. She didn't know who had been upstairs. She didn't know if the black car would return. But she knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't over. She turned to Emily. "Pack whatever you can carry. We're leaving in 5 minutes." Emily hesitated. "Where will we go?" Sarah clenched her jaw. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find us." She didn't know where. She didn't know how. But she knew one thing. She would protect Emily at all costs, even if it meant facing whatever horrors lurked in the shadows, even if it meant going to war. Nowhere is safe. The wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling the brittle branches of the bare oak trees lining the road. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white as she stole a glance at the rearview mirror. Emily sat in the back seat, cradling the newborns as if they might disappear at any moment. Her arms wrapped around them protectively, her body tense, her breath shallow. The babies, oblivious to the world they had been born into, slept soundly against her chest. Sarah swallowed the fear crawling up her throat. They had left the house in a hurry, too much of a hurry, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The duffel bag she had packed sat on the passenger seat, filled with whatever she had managed to grab in the few chaotic minutes before they fled. There had been no time to think, only time to run. The image of the open front door still burned in Sarah's mind. She had locked it before confronting the presence upstairs. She was sure of it. And yet, when she had returned to the living room, the door had been standing wide open, and the black car had vanished. Someone had been in the house. Someone had been watching them. Sarah's pulse thundered as she stole another glance in the mirror. Nothing. No cars trailing them. No shadowy figures lurking behind them. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Emily had been right. They always find her. A soft whimper from the back seat pulled Sarah from her thoughts. One of the babies had stirred, its tiny face scrunching up as a weak cry escaped its lips. Emily shushed the child gently, rocking them back and forth with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times before. Sarah's throat tightened. Her 10-year-old daughter, her child, was acting more like a mother than she was. Sarah's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Emily," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We need to talk." Emily didn't respond at first. She kept her gaze fixed on the sleeping infants, her fingers tightening around their blankets. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "We don't have to." Sarah's chest constricted. "Yes, we do." Emily bit her lip, her shoulders stiffening. "You're going to ask where I was. Who took me?" Sarah exhaled slowly. "I need to understand, Emily. You vanished for a year. Then you showed up on our doorstep with 2 newborns. None of this makes sense." Emily's fingers curled into the fabric of the baby's blanket. "It won't make sense." Sarah glanced at her in the rearview mirror, trying to keep her voice gentle. "Then help me. I can't protect you if I don't know what's coming for us." Emily hesitated. For a moment, Sarah thought she might stay silent. Then, so quietly Sarah almost didn't hear, Emily murmured, "It started with the needles." Sarah felt her entire body go cold. Emily's voice was detached, hollow, as if she were recounting someone else's story instead of her own. "They would strap me to a chair," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hold my arm down. Stick needles into me. They said it was for progress. That I was special. That my blood was different." Sarah's stomach twisted violently. "Emily." "They called it the New Dawn Project." Emily's voice was eerily calm, like she had long since accepted whatever horrors had been done to her. "They said I was part of something bigger. That my body could handle things no one else could." Sarah's hands trembled on the steering wheel. "What did they do to you?" Emily's gaze dropped to the babies. "They made me carry them." Sarah slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a halt on the side of the road, the tires kicking up dust as a sickening silence fell over them. Sarah twisted in her seat, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "What do you mean they made you carry them?" Emily didn't look up. "They put something inside me," she whispered, her voice raw. "Something not normal. I didn't know what it was at first. I got sick, really sick. Then my stomach started getting bigger, and they kept saying it was working, that it was a miracle." Sarah's heart pounded so hard she thought she might be sick. "You're 10 years old. That's not possible." Emily's eyes finally met hers, and Sarah saw something there she hadn't noticed before. Resignation. "They weren't normal babies, Mom." Emily's lips trembled. "They were grown faster. I wasn't supposed to leave until they were ready. They said I wasn't like other kids, that my body could do things normal people couldn't. Sarah felt like she was going to throw up. Her child, her little girl, had been experimented on. Like a test subject. Like an animal. Her mind raced with questions, with denials, with desperate attempts to make sense of something that shouldn't be possible. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. And then, a pair of headlights flooded the inside of the car. Sarah's stomach twisted. A sleek black SUV had pulled onto the road behind them. Its engine idled, waiting, watching. They had found them. Sarah's body moved on instinct. She threw the car into drive, slamming her foot against the gas pedal. The vehicle lurched forward, tires screeching as they peeled down the dark road. The SUV followed. Emily let out a sharp gasp. "Mom." Sarah's pulse roared in her ears. "Hold on." The SUV's headlights glared through the rearview mirror. Too bright, too close. Whoever was inside wasn't just following them. They were chasing them. Sarah's fingers were slick with sweat as she gripped the wheel, pushing the car faster. 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 But the SUV matched her every move. The road ahead split into two paths, one leading toward the highway, the other disappearing into the dense forest. Sarah made a split-second decision. She yanked the wheel hard to the right, veering onto the unpaved road leading into the woods. The car bounced violently as dirt and gravel kicked up behind them. The SUV followed. Emily clutched the babies, her breath ragged. "Mom, they won't stop." Sarah gritted her teeth, her focus locked on the winding road ahead. They're gonna have to. The road narrowed, trees closing in around them like twisted sentinels. Sarah saw her chance. A narrow gap between two thick oak trees, just wide enough for their car. Not for the SUV. She took it. The car screeched through the gap, branches scraping against the sides as she barreled forward. The SUV didn't make it. There was a deafening crash behind them. The sound of metal against bark, of shattered glass, of something slamming into the trees at full force. Then, silence. Sarah didn't stop, didn't slow. She drove deeper into the forest, deeper into the unknown. Only when she was sure they were alone did she finally stop, her entire body trembling. Emily let out a shaky breath. "Mom," she whispered. Sarah turned to her, her breath ragged. "They're never going to stop," Emily murmured. And Sarah knew. She was right. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The night had swallowed them whole. Sarah's fingers trembled as she killed the engine, plunging the car into an oppressive silence. The forest loomed around them, the gnarled branches stretching overhead like skeletal fingers, their jagged edges swaying against the bruised sky. The only sound was the faint hum of the cooling engine and the ragged breathing from the back seat. Emily clutched the babies tightly, her small body shaking as she rocked them gently, whispering words Sarah couldn't hear. The newborns whimpered softly, their tiny fists curling against Emily's chest, their fragile existence oblivious to the danger that lurked just beyond the trees. Sarah gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her ears straining for any sound beyond the car, any sign that the men from the SUV had survived the crash. She could still hear it in her head, the sickening sound of metal crumpling, the shattering of glass, the sudden, jarring silence that followed. Had they survived? Sarah forced herself to breathe. "Focus. We can't stay here," she whispered, barely recognizing the tight rasp of her own voice. Emily didn't answer. She sat curled in the back seat, her eyes locked on the shadows outside. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried once since she returned. That terrified Sarah more than anything. She reached back and gently touched Emily's arm. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I need you to listen to me. I need to know the truth. I need to know what we're up against." Emily's breath hitched. She held the babies even closer. Sarah turned in her seat, her desperation mounting. "Please, Emily, you have to tell me everything. No more secrets. Emily hesitated, her fingers gripping the thin blankets wrapped around the babies. She bit her lower lip so hard it nearly bled, then whispered, "They weren't supposed to let me go." A chill crawled up Sarah's spine. Emily's gaze flickered toward the trees, as if expecting something. Someone. To emerge from the darkness. "They told me I was special," she continued, her voice hollow. "That I was the first of my kind. They did tests. They watched me. Every single day." She swallowed hard. They were waiting. Sarah's stomach twisted. Waiting for what? Emily's grip on the babies tightened. For them to be born. Sarah felt like the air had been punched from her lungs. "Emily, what did they do to you?" Emily shook her head, her shoulders trembling. "I don't know how it happened. I only know what they told me. That my body could handle it. That I was their proof. They said I was." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "A miracle." Sarah's skin prickled. Emily exhaled shakily. "They said I was different. That I had something in me that no one else had. That's why they picked me." Her voice broke on the last word. "I didn't understand. But then, I started getting sick. My body changed. And then the babies came." Sarah stared at her daughter in horror. "Emily," she rasped. That's not how any of this works." Emily finally looked at her, her eyes hollow. "I know." Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. "You were gone for a year." She inhaled sharply. "But a pregnancy lasts 9 months." Emily didn't respond. Sarah's vision swam. Oh God. Emily hadn't been missing for a full pregnancy. She had been missing for 12 months. Which meant the babies hadn't taken 9 months to grow. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What did they do to you?" she whispered. Emily's fingers dug into the fabric of the blanket. "They made me something I'm not supposed to be." A branch snapped in the distance. Sarah froze. Her head whipped toward the trees. The sound was close. Too close. Emily let out a sharp breath, her whole body going rigid. Sarah reached for the keys, but she stopped herself. If they turned the car back on, the headlights would give away their location. Instead, she reached for the fireplace poker she had grabbed earlier, gripping it tightly. A slow, rhythmic crunching of footsteps echoed through the darkness. Someone was out there. Emily's breathing became erratic. "Mom," she whimpered. Sarah raised a finger to her lips. "Stay silent." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. No wind, no movement, no sound. Then, a voice. "Emily." Sarah's entire body went cold. The voice was wrong. Too smooth, too calm, too controlled. "Emily," it repeated, "you shouldn't have left." Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was familiar. Emily's body went still. She gripped the babies tighter, her small frame trembling. Sarah's grip on the poker tightened. The voice came again, this time closer. "You belong to us." Sarah's pulse roared. She could barely breathe. She turned to Emily, panic coursing through her veins. "Who is that?" Emily didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then, in the faintest whisper, she said, "Dr. Caldwell." Sarah's blood froze. The leader of New Dawn Medical. The one who had taken Emily. The one who had turned her into whatever they had made her into. A shadow shifted between the trees. Sarah saw the outline of a man standing just beyond the reach of the moonlight. Tall, still, watching. The babies stirred in Emily's arms, their tiny cries piercing the air. The figure took a step forward. Sarah acted without thinking. She grabbed Emily's wrist and ran. The forest swallowed them whole. Branches clawed at their skin, roots threatened to trip them. But Sarah didn't stop. She clutched Emily's hand in a death grip, the baby's cries growing louder as they stumbled through the undergrowth. Behind them, the voice followed. "Emily," it called. "We just want to bring you home." Sarah's breath came in frantic gasps. Emily sobbed, her legs shaking beneath her. "They'll never stop," she whimpered. Sarah pulled her closer, her body aching with desperation. "We have to keep moving," she panted. But even as she ran, she knew the truth. They would never stop. Not until they had Emily. Not until they had the babies. And Sarah would die before she let that happen. The final stand. The wind howled through the trees, sending leaves spiraling into the darkness as Sarah pulled Emily deeper into the forest. The earth beneath them was uneven, damp from recent rain, the roots clawing at their feet like unseen hands trying to drag them down. Emily stumbled, her grip tightening around the babies. "Mom," she whimpered, her voice strained with exhaustion. I can't." Sarah didn't stop. She couldn't. They were still behind them. Somewhere in the darkness, Dr. Caldwell was following. Hunting. The sound of crunching leaves echoed behind them, the rhythm slow and deliberate. He wasn't running. He didn't need to. He knew they had nowhere to go. Sarah's mind raced. There had to be a way out, a way to escape. But the forest was endless, and the more they ran, the more Sarah realized they weren't just lost. They were being herded. A cold chill crawled up her spine. They were being guided, forced to go exactly where he wanted them. Sarah skidded to a stop, chest heaving, sweat clinging to her skin despite the cold. She turned, yanking Emily behind a thick tree trunk. Her pulse hammered so hard it felt like it would burst through her ribs. She needed time, needed a plan. But the babies were crying. Their tiny wails pierced the silence, fragile and innocent, but too loud. Sarah clenched her teeth. They were making it easier for him to find them. Emily rocked them gently, her own breath hitching. "Shh, please, please," she whispered desperately, but the babies, her babies, didn't understand. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "Listen to me. We're going to get out of this, okay?" Emily nodded, but her expression said otherwise. She didn't believe it. And Sarah didn't have time to convince her. A low voice drifted through the trees. "You can't run forever, Sarah." Sarah's stomach dropped. He was closer. Too close. She swallowed down the rising panic. Focus. If she could just buy time. A glint of metal caught her eye. Sarah's breath hitched. Through the dense trees, barely visible in the moonlight, she saw a fence. A chain-link fence, stretching high into the night, topped with barbed wire. A way out. Maybe. Sarah's fingers dug into Emily's arm. "We have to make a run for it." Emily's gaze darted toward the fence, then back to Sarah. She hesitated. "Mom," she whispered, fear thick in her voice. "What if it's a trap?" Sarah didn't have an answer. But what other choice did they have? The sound of slow, measured footsteps drew closer. Sarah sucked in a sharp breath. "No time." "We run," she said firmly. She grabbed Emily's wrist and sprinted toward the fence. The babies cried louder, their tiny voices rising in the cold night air. The footsteps behind them sped up. Sarah's heart pounded. She could hear the rustling of branches, the heavy crunch of leaves. He was chasing them now. The fence grew closer. 50 feet. 40. 30. The ground was slick beneath them. Sarah's feet nearly slid out from under her, but she didn't stop. 20. Emily sobbed, her breath coming in frantic gasps. 10. Then, a gunshot rang out. Sarah screamed as the bullet struck the fence just inches from where they were running. Emily froze. Sarah yanked her daughter behind her, shielding her with her body. "Stay down," she hissed. The forest fell silent. Then, the voice. Enough. A shadow emerged from the trees. Dr. Caldwell stepped forward, his white coat stark against the darkness. His face, smooth and composed, was a mask of patience. But his eyes burned with possession, like he was looking at something that belonged to him. Sarah stood her ground. Her body screamed for her to run. But she couldn't. Not anymore. She had run far enough. Emily pressed herself against Sarah, trembling. "Mom," she whispered. Sarah squeezed her hand. She wouldn't let them take her. Caldwell took a slow step forward. Unarmed now. Confident. "You should never have left," he said, his voice calm. Too calm. Emily shook her head violently. "I won't go back." Caldwell tilted his head, as if observing something fascinating. "Of course you will," he said simply. His eyes flickered to the babies. Sarah stepped in front of them. Caldwell's lips curled into something almost resembling amusement. "You don't even know what they are, do you?" he mused. Sarah's stomach twisted. "They're her babies," she snapped. Caldwell chuckled. "Are they?" His gaze settled on Emily, sharp and knowing. Emily clenched her jaw, her hands shaking. "You don't have to do this, Emily," he said softly. "Come home. We'll take care of you. We'll take care of them." Sarah's entire body went rigid. "You're lying," Emily whispered. Caldwell exhaled, almost like a sigh. "It's not a lie. You were made for this. You are the future." Sarah snapped. "No, she's a child." Her voice trembled with fury. "And you stole her life." Caldwell's expression darkened. A heartbeat of silence stretched between them. Then, more footsteps. Sarah's chest constricted. More men emerged from the darkness. Armed men. There were too many. Sarah's fingers tightened around Emily's wrist. No, 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 no. She had failed. They had nowhere left to run. Caldwell took a slow step forward, his voice eerily gentle. "Emily." Emily's breath hitched. Sarah felt her daughter let go of her hand. Her heart stopped. "Emily." Sarah gasped. "No." Emily turned to her mother, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want them to hurt you," she whispered. Sarah's throat tightened. "No, please." Then, the baby in Emily's arms stirred and opened its eyes. Sarah's stomach dropped. The baby's eyes glowed silver. Not human. Caldwell smiled. "Yes," he whispered, his gaze full of something terrifying. Emily's breath shook. Then, she did something Sarah never expected. She ran. Not toward Caldwell. Not toward Sarah. But toward the fence. The men reacted instantly. A gun was raised. Sarah moved on instinct. She grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it. The gunman staggered back, his aim thrown off. Emily reached the fence. And then, Sarah watched in stunned horror as her daughter did something impossible. Emily jumped, higher than any human should be able to, and cleared the barbed wire fence. Sarah's breath caught. Caldwell's smile vanished. Emily landed on the other side. She turned, her gaze locking onto her mother's. Then she ran into the night. Sarah let out a sob. Caldwell exhaled, his expression unreadable. "She'll come back," he murmured. Sarah stared at him, hatred burning in her chest. "No," she whispered. "She won't." Caldwell's smile returned. "We'll see." And then, he turned, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Sarah alone, with the knowledge that her daughter was out there, and that new dawn would never stop hunting her. Never. The dawn, it follows. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine needles through the cold night air. Sarah stood motionless, her breath uneven, her fingers digging into the chain-link fence that now separated her from her daughter. Emily was gone, vanished into the darkness. Sarah's body trembled with exhaustion, her mind struggling to grasp what had just happened. Her daughter, her little girl, had leaped over the fence like something beyond human, like something they had turned her into. But Emily had escaped. She had chosen to run. Sarah clung to that fact like a lifeline. Behind her, the men in white coats, Caldwell's men, began to scatter, their murmurs thick with frustration. Their prize had slipped through their fingers. Sarah turned slowly, her eyes locking onto Caldwell. The scientist stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his face a mask of patience. There was no panic, no anger, only a small, knowing smile. "She'll be back," he said. Sarah's nails scraped against the metal links of the fence. "You don't know my daughter." Caldwell's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. "Don't I?" Sarah's breath hitched. She wanted to scream, to tear him apart, to demand that he undo whatever he had done to her child. But she knew the truth. There was nothing left to undo. Emily wasn't the same girl who had walked home from school a year ago, and she never would be again. Caldwell exhaled, glancing at the treetops swaying in the wind. "She's remarkable," he mused. "You should be proud." Sarah's nails bit into her palms. "She's not your experiment," she spat. Caldwell tilted his head, as if considering. Then, with a small smile, he stepped back into the shadows. "You'll see her again." Then, like a ghost, he disappeared into the night. Sarah stood in silence. She had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. The babies whimpered in her arms, their tiny bodies curling into her warmth. Sarah looked down at them, at their soft skin, their impossibly perfect features. She thought of the way one of them had opened its eyes. Silver, not blue like Emily's, not brown like hers. Something else, something that wasn't human. Sarah swallowed hard. Emily had left them with her. And Sarah didn't know whether it was because her daughter trusted her or because she was afraid of what they might become. She took a slow, unsteady breath. It didn't matter. They were hers now. And no matter what blood ran in their veins, no matter what Caldwell had done to them, she would protect them, just as she had tried to protect Emily. She turned, disappearing into the trees, the babies held close to her chest. She didn't look back, because Emily wasn't there anymore. And Sarah knew. Somewhere, out in the vast unknown, her daughter was running, not away, not in fear, but towards something only she could understand, a future that didn't belong to this world. And one day, when the time was right, Emily would return. And when she did, everything would change. Forever. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.